segue for maybe a wet Christmas that we'll be having as well. Now that we entered into November, you know how the months really fly, and soon we'll be singing the Christmas carols. Hello, good morning. My name is Dibala and I trust you had a lovely restorative night and you're ready for the day today. Today is Wednesday. Every Wednesday we have Global Today coming your way, where we analyze foreign policy, diplomacy and security around across our country, the region and the world as well. What is happening? We have His Majesty the King of UK. This is King Charles III, who is in the country, and of course yesterday he spoke quite movingly, revisiting the past of his country, where atrocities and injustices were made out to some of our citizens, and still we have a festering wound that has to be healed. And that was a good happy medium that we saw yesterday. We shall also be discussing this, just looking back into history and what does it portend also with our relations and also our shared, of course, interest in the Commonwealth countries as well. We shall be looking at what is happening in Tanzania. We have the president of Tanzania there, not the president of Tanzania, but the president of Germany, who is visiting Tanzania. And of course, also the issues of atrocities, regimes that were there, or colonization, a bit of German. We'll get a history of that with the Majimaji rebellion. And also, we have the president of Iran, who is in South Africa, that is Ayatollah, especially right now that we know the warring factions in Middle East is continuing. What does it really portend? Also, them cementing relations with South Africa, who they have taken a stand in support of Palestine. A lot of issues that we'll be looking at this morning, so make sure you also get to drive a show with me. You can hit me on our X handle, at Dibala is my X handle, also at KTN News as well. You can find your questions there and share your contributions. We shall also be sampling that in the course of the program this morning. But let's see how the weather will be today. Right, time to see how the dailies are faring on this morning. Fresh off the press, we begin with the Standard, where facing the empire's dark past is what he is holding the front or the splash this morning. Royal visit, it says here, Britain's King Charles III, in his first visit to a Commonwealth country since assuming the throne, was confronted by his nation's dark colonial history on day one of his 4-day tour, rich in pomp and symbolism. And you have a story on page 2, 3, 4 and 6 of the Standard this morning. You can see a related picture there, him laying a wreath at the tomb of the unknown warrior at Uhuru Gardens in Nairobi yesterday. And we shall give you all that story and also have a bit of discussion with our panelists today. Also, just bearing in mind that today is Wednesday and we'll normally discuss diplomacy matters and also history as well. High cost of living, experts lay blame on the government. That story is stuck to on page 8 of the Standard this morning. Also remember you have the Enterprise magazine coming in handy for you every Wednesday. And it's all about startups. Tech driving seat in the EV shift. That is the electric vehicle shift. You can follow the story inside the Enterprise magazine. In the Standard today, KRA targets luxury shoppers in tax evasion crackdown. Now this has raised a lot of scruples as far as taxing. The tourists will be coming into the country, or when you actually jet into the country, anything that is above 75,000 shillings will be taxed, old or new. Right, and so this is bound also to spark a lot of the discussion around it as well, where KRA is looking every which way to try and tax Kenyans. Any sliver of entry that they can use, they will try and maximize on that. That story is tucked away on page 17 of the Standard this morning. Also, you can look in on the pages to just follow the happenings of Ballon Dion as well. Let me try and scroll back there. It's a bit jumbled up so that I can show you what we have on the front page of the Daily Nation. Historic visit, royal tour, King Charles III and Queen Camilla hosted by President Ruto on day one of trip, ties that bind. King Charles, I should say, III speaks of his family's and Britain's special connection or connections to Kenya, and roots for an ever closer partnership of equals between the two nations. But the British monarch also wades into his country's wrongdoings of the past against Kenyans, promising to deepen his understanding of the wrongs as President Ruto pushes for reparations. You have a story on page 2 and 3 of the Daily Nation this morning. Best of the best, governor's performance ranking also is listed on page 12 of the Standard. 70%. We have George Natembeya leading there, or having tied that particular position with Gladys Wang of Homa Bay. We have 67%. This is Simon Kachapin of West Pokot. We have Simbarati standing at 64%, together with Irungu Kangata Moranga and Jeremiah Lomo Rukai of Turkana. Also, Mutula Kilonzo of Makueni is at 63%, 64%, I should say, 63%. Wesley Rotich, Elgeo Marakwet. And we have also 63%. Kawira Mwangaza, who should be actually facing the Senate today. And we know her fate as far as her impeachment is concerned after it was given the green light by the MCAs of Meru. 63%. Julius Malombe Kitui, amongst others. You can read all about them inside the Daily Nation this morning. Cap tax appetite, Kenya Kwanza told. Experts who appeared before the National Dialogue Committee to discuss the high cost of living have criticized the government or Kenya Kwanza administration for its fiscal policy proposals that rely on taxation to raise revenue. You have the story on page 6 of the Daily Nation this morning. Also, when to begin the sexuality talk with your children. This is all tucked in the Parenting magazine. And you have the related picture on what is on the front page as a splash today, King Charles III. It is well known, I think, that my dear mother, the late Queen, had a particular affection for Kenya and the Kenyan people. She arrived here in 1952, a princess but left a queen. The wrongdoings of the past are a cause of the greatest sorrow and deepest regret. They are abhorrent and unjustifiable acts of violence committed against Kenyans as they waged, as you said, at the United Nations, a painful struggle for independence and sovereignty. And for that, there can be no excuse. This is 1952, the year Queen Elizabeth II, King Charles' mother, came to Kenya as a princess and left as a queen. And you can see him here. This is King Charles III and President William Ruto during a ceremonial welcome at State House, Nairobi yesterday. King Charles III and his wife Queen Camilla on a 4-day visit to the country. Candidate seats, tests in hospitals As exams draw to a close, the Kenya Certificate of Primary Education and the Kenya Primary School Education Assessment Examinations entered their second day yesterday, with senior government officials monitoring the exercise. Education CS Ezekiel Mashogu revealed that 21 candidates in Nairobi are writing their exams in hospitals or in hospital. He spoke when he witnessed the opening of examination container in Kibra sub-county in the capital. We have the story on page 4 and 5 of the Daily Nation this morning. And on the teaser there, we don't have anything today. We can go full steam ahead and see what we have on the front page of the Star. Why Ruto taxes could be futile. This is what the Control of Budgets is warning about. Sharp surge in the cost of living, triggered mainly by unprecedented fuel costs. You have the story on page 4 and 5 of the Star this morning. King Charles honors Kenya with visit on 60th Freedom Anniversary. And you can see him inspecting the Guard of Honor there, amongst other pictures as well. And the Queen also planting a tree. That story is tucked away on page 8 of the Star today. Regional agency 80% sure of heavy rains this month. Counties in Ukambani, the entire coast and northeastern regions are on alert for heavy rains that are likely to cause flooding. Between now and January, a new report shows the entire region is sure to receive enhanced rainfall, especially this month. So be preparing for water harvesting there. That story continues on page 2 of the Star this morning. Nyeri Granary recalls, or Nyeri Granny, not the granary, Nyeri Granny recalls work of Sister Nyadha. This is Milka Wabura Itundu and her 2 siblings contracted a deadly disease that mainly affected their toes. A Catholic nun came over and washed them affectionately and afraid she will be infected. This is how she saved this big toe, the granny said, pointing at it with her walking stick. You can follow the story on page 3 of the Star this morning. Mwangaza to face plenary as Azimio Kenya Kwanza differ. And you have the story on page 9 of the Star this morning. And Argentine World Cup winner bags record 8th Ballon d'Or award. You can follow the story on page 31 of the Star this morning. Let's see what the People Daily is holding for us. Ruto hails the king. This is all about glove diplomacy. Kenya becomes first Commonwealth country to host the monarch since his coronation amidst demands for an apology over colonial era atrocities. Britain offers 823 million shillings to support education programs. You have a story on page 2, 3, 4 and 5 of the People Daily this morning. President William Ruto can be seen here during the singing of the national anthem at the Uhuru Gardens, where he laid a memorial wreath alongside visiting King Charles III and Queen Camilla of the United Kingdom in Nairobi yesterday. The King, who kick-started his 4-day visit to Kenya, was later hosted to a state banquet in State House, where he addressed the nation on the UK-Kenya ties. That story continues on page 2, 3 and 4 and 5 of the People Daily this morning. Candidates take exam at night over transport delays. That is a story on page 6. And Kawira to be heard by Senate plenary. That is a story that you want to follow there on page 1. There was a debate whether it should be the committee or the plenary. And now it seems they have settled for the plenary and not the committee. And we'll see how that really pans out. Before, when she had the first impeachment, it was before the committee. Magavana bora wafichuliwa and their faces are here. Maendeleo katika 10 bora kuna wanawake wawili waliowapita wanaume kwa ustawishaji wa kaunti zao. Gavana Kawira Mwangaza wa Meru ni mmoja wao. You can follow the story on page 2 of Taifa Leo. And Messi ndiyo mshindi wa Ballon tena. Pastor Ezekiel ni mweupe kama pamba. Mahakama ya Shanzu yakosa kumpata mhubiri huyo na hatia. You can follow the story on page 3 of Taifa Leo this morning. As we buckled up to business, this is what you're waking up to on the front page of the Business Daily. Last minute new Bolt license blocks little car buyout bid. NTSA granted Bolt license renewal on Monday. Top ride hailing service provider drops booking fee. You can follow the story on page 9 of the Business Daily this morning. Crypto players withhold tax billions is another story you can follow. And welcome to Kenya King Charles. We can see him here holding court with the president there, Britain's King Charles III with President William Ruto during the ceremonial welcome for the visiting monarch and his spouse Queen Camilla at State House in Nairobi yesterday. Now, court stops 3.8 billion shillings compensation for SGR bypass land. The Court of Appeal has suspended payment of 3.8 billion shillings to 6 companies that successfully sued the government for mandatory acquisition of their land for construction of a standard gauge railway and southern bypass in Mombasa, and bank seeking review of law on filing taxes every 5 days. Kenyan banks with Parliament want Parliament to review a new law requiring firms in sectors with a high risk of under-declaring taxes to pay due every 5 days. And Kabasit joins list of companies ditching KPLC for solar power. Carbon dioxide manufacturer Kabasit Investments has lined up 3 solar power generation plants as the firm seeks to further cut reliance on costly and unreliable supply from Kenya Power. You can follow the story on page 6 of the Business Daily this morning. Let's see what we have in Uganda, where 30% of Ugandans have mental disorders. Inadequate treatment. This is a study that is revealing this, and you can read all about it in the Daily Monitor this morning. 30% of Ugandans have mental disorders. That is a huge percentage there. And also US to scrap Uganda off AGOA list. That is another story that you want to follow on page 4. This is alongside also the Central African Republic. And largely, maybe people are seeing this due to the new legislation on the anti-gay movement, or the LGBTQ as well. But anyway, AGOA was meant to be seeing the sunset in 2025. Kenya also being listed there as well. Whether that will be renewed or not is also a question that is still hanging on the rafters of our minds as well. You can follow the story about AGOA listing also on page 4 of the Daily Monitor in Uganda. Mwinyi, our focus areas. This is the president of Zanzibar, Dr. Hussein Ali Mwinyi, speaking at length about what have been achieved on the Isle. You can follow the story inside the publication of The Citizen. And freedom fighters remains set for return from Germany. You can see the president of Germany there with the president of Tanzania. The president of Germany is in Tanzania, where also issues of injustices have been raised up also that were perpetrated by the Germans against the Tanzanians as well, just looking back into history and the story of Maji Maji rebellion as well. That is happening in Tanzania. In Rwanda, new government scorecard calls for more services tailored to PWDs. The report is based on key pillars of governance in the country. And you have the story on page 4 of the New Times. Rwanda secures $262 million to deal with climate shocks. And you can see Ruben Atoyan, the IMF mission lead, Richard Tusabe, Minister of State in charge of the National Treasury in the Finance Ministry, and John Rwangombwa, Governor of the National Bank of Rwanda, interacting during the meeting with the IMF team mission on Tuesday, October the 31st. The meeting gave Rwanda access to $262 million, approximately 325 billion Rwandan francs from the International Monetary Fund's standby credit facility to help mitigate the balance of payments pressures arising from climate-related shocks. You can follow the story inside the New Times. Government warns paint factories over usage of hazardous chemicals, and 22 stations to monitor floods in Kigali City as well. Also, they are on high alert. That is how it looks. The East African this week is all focusing on Ruto and his plan to end liquidity crisis, to raise cash to repay $2 billion Eurobond, stabilize shilling and spark growth. President has taken it upon himself to fly out to lobby lenders and investors to put money in the economy. And that story is on page 5. You can see a file picture there of him, President Ruto, arriving in Beijing, China on October the 15th, 2023. Also, How Europe is challenging China's Belt and Road Initiative. European Union is pulling $300 billion to give Africa better choice of energy infrastructure projects. And East African force in DRC may be forced into combat. The continual attack of peacekeepers by armed groups could push EACRF to raise its guard, fire its first bullet. This is a story to follow on page 6 of the East African this morning. I shall be showing you what we have on the front page of the Newsweek, the front page also of The Economist, the front page of the Time magazine, along other international publications as well, as we continue pace with our discussions this morning. Our guests are already here. I want just to extend my hearty welcome to our panelists this morning who will take us through the raft of issues that we shall be discussing this morning, just also looking at the King's visit in the country, King Charles III as well. What does it really portend moving forward? Cementing also a relationship and dealing with past atrocities and injustices that he's quite also, he quite movingly spoke about it yesterday, and as he continues with his tour as well. And many civil organizations also raising questions of the loved ones that got lost, and they have maybe not even bodies or any symbol of attachment and sentimentality that they can relate with, that they think the colonialists still have them, and they want that also back in the country. Allow me to introduce Professor Peter Kagwanja, who is with us this morning, the CEO of Africa Policy Institute. Also, we do have with us as well Dr. Moses Onyango, who is the chair of politics and international affairs at USIU. We have with us as well Dr. Ken Mbogi, who is a historian at the University of Nairobi. And also we do have with us Yusuf Hassan, who is a member of Parliament, Kamukunji. Also, he is a member of the Defense and Relations and Intelligence Committee at the National Assembly. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Right, first, it sounds like I've not served you some tea, and it is warm. Samosas also, they're just looking at you. So we can continue, at least I know it's early in the morning. You need some glucose. That hurries you to come early in the morning in the studio as well. Yeah? So some sugar to spike, at least, and start you off on a good cheery start. But thank you for joining us nonetheless. We really do appreciate. And I just wanted to just get introductory remarks from you. Professor Peter Kagwanja, your outlook so far. The King is here. We have also the President of Germany in Tanzania. We have the President of Iran, who is also in South Africa. A lot of visitations around us. All right, you can tell us. And also we'll get a highlight from Dr. Ken Mbogi as well, who will tell us how it was. We had a very interesting also lecture at the University of Nairobi, just visiting King Samoei and the injustices there, and how it was very pivotal also during those colonial past that we are actually talking about this morning. Yusuf Hassan as well, thank you. You'll tell us what is on the table of the Committee on Defense, and you'll tell us what you're looking at as, so far moving forward. But let's just get remarks. We'll begin with you. I think your mic is really crackling. I'll look at it, Professor.
Good morning, colleagues.
Good morning.
I want to petition you
because I have issues with mic, yeah? But,
you have issues?
Yeah, I have a bit of issues with mic. Let me just check it out. But we can begin with Mheshimiwa Yusuf, then as I sort it out. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes.
Well, we have been busy, the Committee for Foreign Affairs has been busy with the vetting of ambassadors and high commissioners.
Yes.
We've had the largest number since I became a member of Parliament, and been this 27 of them, going to Africa, Europe, and Asia. And it's been a very intense process, because we do between about 4 nominees every day. We started last week, and we're finishing tomorrow. We've seen some very interesting candidates, some of them from the diplomatic service. The largest number, in fact, members of the diplomatic service, the professional career foreign officials who are for the first time elevated or to ambassadorial position or to appointments outside the capital city. And very few politicians, which is quite welcome. We have only had 1 or 2 politicians. But in the previous occasions when I was on this committee vettings, almost half of the appointees of the previous government were non-professionals, and mostly politicians who were defeated or rejected by Wananchi in the elections. So it's quite a good change, because we need to have a well-trained professional foreign service. Occasionally we should be able to throw in some expertise from different fields, including politics. But overall we should have a very good balance in which our country is well represented by people who've been trained to do that particular job.
So in terms of, because I've heard you talk about for the first time, we have people from the diplomatic mission coming for actually this, or from the diplomatic office coming for this particular sets. We are talking about meritocracy at last. That has not been happening. It's been a preserve mostly of the politicians, and most of them that quite didn't make the cut as far as...
No, it has been happening. I mean, the bulk of our appointees has always been, the majority have always been from the foreign service. But increasingly, during the first Uhuru Ruto and the second Uhuru Ruto government, it appears as if there was an attempt to push a lot of the associates who have not done very well in the political field into the foreign service. And this actually had a kind of an effect, in the sense that it was demoralizing the professionals, given the fact that, in fact, the opportunities for upward mobility was affected by this particular policy position. But now I think the balance is returning back. Yeah, of course, you can have engineers, doctors, politicians, academics going in to enrich the profession. But when you have a disproportionate number of them been appointed, then it does in fact distort our foreign service and demoralizes our foreign service professionals.
All right. Okay, thank you. Peter Kagwanja, I think I've sorted out your...
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Oh, very good. I wanted to start on a lighter note to basically say that when you're introducing Mheshimiwa Yusuf Hassan, should always indicate that he is a PhD student at the University of Nairobi. That makes us, me and Ken or Bobby, feel good about it.
I feel intimidated because I'm sitting with highly accomplished scholars.
He had one of
just a layman.
He had one of the highest grade in his PhD. We must underline that, and therefore he's a peer to us, and that makes people see our worth. We're not just waking up in the morning to chat.
So I hope I'm speaking for you. The time is a sort of an assessment that you do for him as well. In terms of the output.
No, he's outstripping us, you know, which is great. Now, on another note, you asked me to speak to the visit of the king, and I think for Kenyans, the big question is does Britain matter to Kenya, and therefore should we give such huge welcome to the king?
All right, I think you should just reserve that once we run the story. At least we get into the meat of it.
Into the meat of it.
Yes. So
anyway, the good thing is that Kenya is the first country that the king is visiting, and we are proud of that. I think.
All right.
The second being that this is one of the highest visitor that President Ruto is receiving, and I think it bolsters his image as a Kenyan leader at a time when we are facing some serious challenges. Yeah, that would be my comment.
All right. Let's hear from Dr. Ken Ombobi.
Thank you, Dibar. Morning, colleagues, and those who are watching us and listening to us. I think for us in the academy, one very interesting thing is for the very first time in my lifetime, I have seen the appreciation of the role of history in our public life, and the appreciation of the fact that we are products of our own history largely. and that goes very well with what has been happening, particularly in our Department of History and Archaeology University, where last Thursday we hosted Professor David Anderson to talk about the assassination of Koitalel Arap Samoei, the spiritual leader of the Nandi in the early years of African resistance to colonialism. We probably thought that that's the best way of welcoming the British King to Kenya, to begin thinking.
So this was well orchestrated, because I was wondering how does it really happen that we're talking about this and we haven't so not giving it.
Well,
happenstance, coincidence?
No, it was not an accident.
Well thought out.
Is simply to make a point that the accusations that in the academy and academics generally we are always abstract. We deal with things that have no direct relevance to the politics and debates of the day. That is a big lie. You know, what we operate in the world of ideas, these are things that affect everyday Kenyans in very fundamental ways. The forging of our identities and our worldviews and what keeps us going as a people has a direct connection to our history and social constructs that are informed by our own history. In other words, I'm saying we were telling the world that we are here and we are relevant. And as I said in that meeting, is that, you know, that was a way of looking at our shared history with the British and the violence and the conflicts that have come with it and the treacherous ways that we have related in the past. And telling the world that it is high time we talked about it and reconciled ourselves and see what is relevant to keep us going and what is not relevant to our times and the futures.
Indeed, and of course when you're talking about King Koitalel Arap Samoei, we have a son who's, that is Kipchoge Arap Chomo, who is crediting the British with the contributions to Kenya, like education and public health systems, but said historical injustices must be remedied. His father was killed in 1905. And these are issues that are still, I don't know what Dr. Anderson really raised, especially when it comes to culture and him being the kingpin of the Nandi community.
Oh, well, Professor Anderson has a way of doing things that are geared towards advancing a certain very clear ideological position. His views really never went out of step with us. The point that he generally made is that you know, the British basically has owes Kenyans some explanation, and that the Koitalel Samoei was assassinated by a British soldier who was out of step with what was expected of civilized peoples. That's a fairly revisionist way of looking at it, you know, but the key point is that Maine Stagen, who shot Koitalel, you know, was one of the celebrated British soldiers, partially because of the atrocities that he committed. He did not only kill Maine Stagen, but also he, in Kahua here in, I think in Murang'a, he cleared a whole village.
Actually, villages.
You know, before he went to Nandi. And Professor Anderson was saying he was a crook. And he didn't do the right thing. He didn't behave in ways that were in tandem with the British traditions of civility and respect for human rights and life. But that's generally some kind of revisionism, which is geared towards basically sanitizing some of these things. But he brought out generally also important points that we need to grapple with. We have come to a time when we need to talk about this and reconcile ourselves with our violent past, and of course blame those who need to be blamed.
Thank you.
And glorify those who need to be glorified.
Right, thank you. Okay, well, shall get into it a bit. Let me hear from Dr. Moses Onyango as well. Good to see you. He's been globe-trotting as well, so we'll try to find out. Of course, on a lighter note. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes.
Thank you, Dibal and colleagues. It's good to see you again. Yeah, it's been a lot happening. We hosted Kenya at 60 at United States International University on the 26th and 27th, and of course hosted Professor Anderson, and he gave a very interesting. He presented a good paper that looked at British colonial history in Kenya, and he focused on about two key things: that the issue of ethnicity that we have in Kenya was actually inherited from the British colonial legacy. Spoke about the way that our police force uses judicial means to manage affairs is also inherited from the British colonial system. So it was a fairly interesting conference. But to come to the King's visit, and I know Professor Kagwanja has questioned its importance, and I would like to say that it is welcome because the significance of states is measured in terms of the intensity in which states interact with each other. So when we are visited as a state, we can conceptualize or infer some importance in terms of when the states visits us, that probably we will be having lots of investments also coming with such kind of visits. So, but we'll deal with it in depth as we move on. Thank you.
Right. I think that will also maybe give us a chance to listen in and hear what really happened yesterday, where we had Nairobi rolling out the red carpet for King Charles III and Queen Camilla, as the two were honored with a 21-gun salute at State House on their first day of the 4-day state visits. The event gave Kenyans a snapshot of the royal exquisite fashion taste as Queen Camilla went all out to display her gorgeous fashion statement, donning a diamond oyster brooch which belonged to Queen Elizabeth II. As KTN's Emmanuel To now reports, the two leaders did not address the media at State House, as is the norm with a visiting head of state.
10 minutes to 11 a.m. King Charles III and Queen Camilla make their way to State House, Nairobi, to kick off their 4-day historic state visit to Kenya, the first one to a Commonwealth country. The UK national anthem first, and then the Kenyan national anthem. After inspecting a guard of honor mounted by the Kenya Army, the king was accorded a 21-gun salute, which is the honor given to a sitting head of state. Their visit to State House was stock different from the formerly Government House in Nairobi, now State House, which was built in 1907 in Nairobi to serve as the official residence of the Governor of British East Africa when Kenya was a colony within the British Empire. However, unlike the usual joint addresses, the two heads of state did not address the media, instead retreating to a closed-door meeting where they signed bilateral agreements on the relationship between the two countries.
Hi, Commissioner. How are you? Good to see you again.
The rare opportunity was an avenue for the monarch to showcase their class and fashion, with Queen Camilla stealing the show. Her Majesty decorating her favorite white designer dress with a diamond oyster brooch, which belongs to the late Queen Elizabeth II, symbolic of the land where Queen Elizabeth acceded to power in February 1952. The car in which the royal family rode was also significant as they boarded this Land Rover Discovery SDV6, an English machine. The armored vehicle can withstand attacks. Reception at State House Nairobi, the royal family made its way to Uhuru Gardens, where the history of Kenya is documented and is the place where the flag of Kenya was first hoisted in December 1963. At the refurbished Uhuru Gardens, the king and queen were greeted by the history of the country's dark past as the monarch lay wreaths at the tomb of the unknown warrior, symbolic of the many unknown warriors who died during the fight for independence. The king also visited the Mugumo tree, which sits on the exact spot where on the night of December 12, 1963, Kenya celebrated its independence by lowering the Union flag and raised the flag of Kenya. Emmanuel Toh, KTN News, Nairobi.
And Britain's tarnished colonial past took center stage in Nairobi as King Charles III began the state visit poised to acknowledge painful aspects of the country's long shared history. Accompanied by Queen Camilla on his first visit as a monarch to the former colony, King Charles arrived at Uhuru Gardens hours after he was hosted for ceremonial military rituals at State House, Nairobi, by his host, President William Ruto. Brenda Zedadardiro has more.
Langata Consecration Camp, now revamped and renamed Uhuru Gardens, is where the second royal engagement took place, where the king unveiled a plague and was seen wiping at his cheek as he laid a wreath at the tomb of an unknown warrior. The couple then viewed the Mugumo tree planted on December 12, 1964, to commemorate the day Kenya was declared independent. This marks the spot where the Union flag was lowered and the Kenyan flag raised for the first time. Uhuru in Kenya, meaning freedom. This is a place where colonial authorities resorted to executions and detention without trial as they tried to put down the Mau Mau insurrection, and thousands of Kenyans said they were beaten and sexually assaulted by agents of the administration. During the 2021 Jamhuri Day celebrations, former President Uhuru Kenyatta revisited the dark history behind the concentration camps in Kenya, in which he linked to those operated by Nazi Germany.
On these very grounds sat the largest concentration camp in colonial Africa, holding up to 10,000 freedom fighters at any one given time. Many of our compatriots were tortured and maimed for life in that camp, and many more unknown heroes died in this field.
At the camp, which now sits at the famous newly revamped Uhuru Gardens, Kenyatta revealed that the British colonial government had imprisoned an estimated 10,000 of Kenya's gallant and most feared liberators. At the camps, Kenyan freedom fighters are said to have undergone horrific treatment, including being tortured for information that would serve the colonial masters who sought to curtail the agitation for independence. Scores of Kenyans are said to have died as a result of the inhumane treatment meted on them. Similar detention facilities are located across the country where liberators were subjected to unimaginable treatment. This, however, did not deter them as they remained resilient until Kenya gained independence and eventually became a republic. The Langata Consecration Camp has now been rehabilitated and morphed into a place of remembrance, with the founding fathers advising it should serve as a reminder of Kenya's dark colonial past. The king, during his visit, certainly saw that indeed darkness can be turned into positive energy. Interestingly, the king's state visit coincided with the birthday of the late revolutionary and freedom fighter Field Marshal Dedan Kimathi Washuri, who would be turning 103 today if he would have been alive. Dedan Kimathi was born on October 31st, 1920 in Thige village near Nyeri in central Kenya. He was the leader of Mau Mau movement and was regarded a revolutionary who fought the colonial powers until his execution. During the king's tour, a stone carving of the late Dedan Kimathi was displayed boldly at Uhuru Gardens, and certainly he must have passed by it. Kiama Kiama on Monday in Nairobi demanded the return of Kimathi remains and condemned the planned visit to Uhuru Gardens by the royal family, calling it a mockery to the freedom fighters who were brutally tortured and maimed. The king is this evening expected to acknowledge the painful history during the state banquet at State House, Nairobi. Uhuru Gardens now seeks to embody Kenya's history, becoming an illumination of the future, weaved in hope, written in pictures, sculptures, and historical artifacts. Brenda Zeda Radido, KTN News.
As King Charles III and Queen Camilla make their maiden visit as royals to Kenya, Mombasa County will also be on the global map once again, as the port city also played host to the late Queen Elizabeth II in 1963. Previously, Queen Victoria had also visited Mombasa. Tobias Chanji with more on the royal family footprints in Mombasa.
It was on 6th February 1952 when the then Princess Elizabeth and her husband Prince Philip heard of the death of her father, King George VI. They were at the time putting up a Treetops hotel, and a purported trip to Mombasa was cut short, but only to return in 1963 after she was crowned queen. It is the late Queen's sister, Princess Margaret, who first visited Mombasa in 1956.
Elizabeth alikuja akashukia katika bandari ya Mombasa, Old Port of Mombasa. Aliposhukia bandarini pale, ilikuwa nia yake ni aje atembee Kenya, au aende atembee pia katika mbuga za wanyama, aweze kuona jinsi Kenya ilivyo, na ilikuwa ni katika moja wapo ya zile nchi ambazo zilikuwa ziko chini ya utawala wa Mwingereza.
In Mombasa, National Museums of Kenya says Queen Elizabeth II was among the many celebrities who patronized the Mombasa Club or Yachting Club, which is adjacent to the Fort Jesus within Mombasa Old Town. Founded in 1897, Mombasa Club is the oldest club in Kenya and was, when it opened, exclusively reserved for a white male clientele.
In our records, we have a number of functions which were held on our honor. Like the most memorable one occasion was that of the ball held to celebrate 25 years anniversary of Her Majesty.
Its European members were not more than 50. To qualify for the membership, one was required to have an income of 250 sterling pounds a year. While here, the Queen also had a chance to take coffee at this joint called Camel. That was later renovated. Here one will find traces of Queen Victoria.
Katika jumba ambalo sasa hivi ni Camel's Joint, ama ni restaurant ambayo inaitwa Camel's Joint. Ile ni turathi pia ambapo tunaita Jubilee Building. Wakati huo Bi Elizabeth alikuwa akipitia barabara hii ili aende akapande treni, gari la moshi, liweze kumpeleka mpaka national parks za Kenya.
In 1952, Mombasa got its main landmark when wooden structures resembling elephant tusks were erected to commemorate visits by the British royal family and their resolve to fight poaching.
Wenyeji wakasema ngoja tumfanyie mfano wa kumkaribisha tukitumia miti hii, majani haya ya mnazi.
There were originally just 2 tusks over Moi Avenue, which was then a 1-lane road. However, the road was later expanded to 2 lanes and a new set of tusks was built in 1956 by the Mombasa Municipal Council. Currently, the monument comprises of 4 aluminium tusks in an M shape representing Mombasa across Moi Avenue, previously Kilindini Road, right at the heart of Mombasa town.
I am at Old Town, a very significant place when it comes to the history of Queen Elizabeth, who visited Kenya and spent a night at Mombasa Club on my left and at Camel Joint on my right, where she used to take coffee. From here, she went back through the Kilindini Harbour. Tobias Chanji, KTN News, Mombasa County.
Interesting editor cartoon as well inside the Standard today, where we can see Gado has drawn the Queen or the royals there, of course, with the President and the First Lady holding that particular, how do you normally call this, a long trail of a king's gown when you hold it, but holding it nonetheless. But you can see underneath what we do have as far as the epitaphs are concerned: the colonialism, slavery, British gulags, mass extermination, neo-colonialism, and he says, I here do accept your apologies. Right, it's reading the reverse. Who should be now accepting the apologies. Is it us or the, of course, the Royal Majesty as well? Let's just listen from you, given that history that we've had, or that story, the story that we've done so far, just revisiting this. I think this is a moment of closure, very pivotal visit for the King to be here, and us also just sort of revisiting our old stabs of wounds that we do have. A festering wound that has not been covered. As we can see, activists have been coming for, some of them they're saying, could we have even the head to bury? I think there was from the Kisii region as well. You'll tell us who from the Kisii region. We have also from the Nandi community, and just generally looking at that past and what is happening within East Africa, with the German East Africa as well, the British East Africa. We had in 1905 Samoei Boeing killed, and in 1905 as well in Tanzania we had the beginning of a Maji Maji rebellion, and now we have the German president also in Tanzania for a three-day tour visit there. So, and issues of atrocities and injustices and colonialism is coming to the fore, and them they want, or they're giving the gestures that even the artifacts that were stolen from Tanzania should be returned. I don't know if we had any artifacts as well that are missing here in the country. But let's just begin with you, Yusuf.
Well, thanks, Damal. I think we're now an independent country, despite the fact that we've been colonized by the British. So I think the visit of the King is just a normal visit by a head of state. We receive leaders from all over the world. But this is different in the sense that because we have that brutal British colonial history. And to a certain extent, I'm surprised you're talking of closure. There is no closure because this part of history has never been addressed.
So I'm saying it's a gesture of the beginning of a closure that we should maybe be approaching.
But it's far, far away from. But it's also, it seems to me like the media in Kenya is celebrating colonialism. It is celebrating the history of the colonizer, and the history of the colonized somehow has been erased and does not appear at all. And you should know that the British for many years colonized our country. They dispossessed our people of their land and their freedoms. And one of the most ugliest chapter in that history is the Mau Mau uprising. And quite a number of prominent British scholars have written about it, including and also including our own scholars. But there are three important documentations that we need to address or visit. One is the British Gulag by Caroline Elkins. The second one is the History of the Hanged by David Anderson, whom we have spoken about here. And then A Web of Deceit by Martin Curtis. These books have exposed, they have looked into new information, new documentary about the British colonial system, and they've exposed the brutality of the British in suppressing the Mau Mau uprising. And in this particular case, they used incredible brutal methods of torture. I'll just read a section, just a sentence or two from that. It says, prisoners were questioned with the help of slicing off ears, boring holes in eardrums, flogging until death, pouring paraffin over suspects who were then set alight, and burning eardrums with lit cigarettes. British soldiers used metal castrating instrument to cut off testicles and fingers of the victims. And in that process, over 100 people, mostly from the Kikuyu nation, were killed by the British, according to Caroline Elkins, or died of diseases and starvation. And over 1 million population were put in concentration camps. The entire adult population of the Kikuyu nation were put in concentration camps and suffered despicable, unspeakable tortures and suffering. And the scar of that particular process has never been addressed or healed. So there is a long way for a closure, and it's quite regrettable that in fact the King had an opportunity. We're now in 2023, and you would think that the British government and the British system would move on. But what did he say? He said, he's sorry about the abhorrent and unjustified acts of violence, the greatest sorrow and the deepest regret for the wrongdoings of the past. But unfortunately, Dabal, this is not the unequivocal public apology we expected. Mm. He gave a self-preserving, protective statement of regret which continues to deny British atrocities in Kenya. And I think it would have been fantastic if he had used this opportunity to clear the way so that we can move on about our unfortunate past with the British. Mm-hmm. But that did not happen yesterday, and it's not likely to happen. And one of the reasons why Britain is never likely to offer a public apology is the implications. For example, David Anderson says 1,090 Mau Mau suspects were hanged. This is the highest number of hanging by a colonial authority using a kangaroo type of courts. It is much more than the Algerian War, where the French executed a lot of freedom fighters. And unfortunately, even as we sit now, they executed the leader of the Mau Mau movement, Dedan Kimathi, Field Marshal Dedan Kimathi. We don't know where his body is buried. The British were very good they're very meticulous in keeping colonial records. I'm sure they know where his body is. One of the favors they can do for us as a nation, one of the gifts that they can give us as a nation, is to tell us where that body is buried, so that we can give him a respectable and a deserving burial. And that would help in the part of the closure, because Kimathi prison is by itself a national monument of shame, where thousands and thousands of Kenyans were incarcerated and tortured, and many of them died there. So I think, although I welcome the King's statement, but it is not enough. It doesn't get to the stage where we can in fact feel that Britain has come to terms with its brutal colonial past and the terrible things, the horrible things that they did to Kenyans when they colonized us.
Mm-hmm. And if we hack back into that history, truly we can see the barbarism, the acts that were actually meted out to Kenyans, the exterminations of communities as well, shocked also by the castrations that were brutally done, in an effort to try and just mollify, or not really even mollify, just try and muffle that voice of freedom that they were actually gagging for. But on that particular note, where we've seen some of these artifacts, and we were talking about Dedan Kimathi's body being identified, or where it was actually buried, we need to know the records. We've seen most of these colonialists, beginning with the Portuguese, the Belgians as well, even just a teeny tiny, tooth being brought back to Congo for a ceremonial sort of a burial of Patrice Lumumba. That gesture alone is really telling. Even if it's a fingernail of Dedan Kimathi that we'll want to see, that will be also a sort of a connection with the past and the atrocities that we really underwent as a country. I don't know what you'll have to say.
I mean, I like the kind of detailed view or analysis of that, the issue we are dealing with here from Mheshimiwa Yusuf. And it's important to underline that across Africa, we had two levels of response to colonialism. First, we underline that the empire, particularly the British Empire, where they were said that the sun never set, and an Indian philosopher argued that it could not set because even God could not trusted them in darkness. He could not allow
trusted them in darkness.
They cannot trust the English in darkness. Because hard power was used at its crudest level to impose the empire. That's the history that Charles and and others are trying to confront now. the first level was, of course, the primary resistance to this, the elicited resistance, very, very serious resistance. And this is where we have Mekatiriri, we have Wayaki Wahinga here in Mount Kenya region, we had Koitarero Arab Samoei among the Nandi, we have others in Western Kenya, and so on. So essentially, there was that response. But this produced the first wave of genocide in the 20th century. And if you look at the example of Herero and Namakwa in Namibia today, which was called the Southwest Africa, about 100,000 people were butchered and 10,000 Namakwas killed. And this is a conservative figure. In Tanzania, the Germans almost wiped out the communities in that particular region, in the so-called Maji Maji Rebellion. And here in my county of Muranga, they literally wiped out populations in certain areas. Like go to Katuli and others. Even the population has not recovered in lower parts of Kiharu because of the killing that was done by that Colonel Mansagen, Robert Mansagen. So that's the first. The second, of course, is the Mau Mau, which we're calling the secondary resistance. And this was now the wars for liberation. In Kenya, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Algeria, and other places, this was very, very violent. Because the Europeans were determined to retain these countries as white men's country. That's why it became such brandy. In Nigeria, you don't find that. In Uganda, you don't find that kind of violence. But in countries like Kenya and Zimbabwe, they were determined to turn those countries into white men's country. And a lot of atrocities had been done. So even when we are talking about apologies, the apologies must be intense in Namibia, in Kenya, in Zimbabwe, and South Africa. And we have seen the Germans have given an unequivocal apology. They have not said, we regret, we are sorrowful, we are this, in regard to Namibia, and put aside 1 billion euros, basically to build projects where they have these are done. So they committed a specific figure, not necessarily for reparation, but at least to make up for that. They are now in Tanzania. We want to see what kind of thing they are going to do. We've seen the Dutch basically unequivocally apologizing for what happened in South Africa and in their role in slavery. And so on. And we have also seen the Belgians, basically in the Congo. The Belgians have not apologized explicitly, but at least they have taken bold measures, including returning the tomb of Patrice Lumumba to be buried, to bring that situation to a closure. The British are still, using their words, and I like the phrase that was used by, Elkins, Caroline Elkins, when he was addressing the king as he was coming to Kenya. He told him that not to keep on, holding back the words, just speak them out. Say, we apologize as British. We apologize for what happened. Then you basically let history, on its own, rather than basically holding back, using very long-winded phrases that say the same thing. That yes, it happened, but it just happened. That kind of a thing. And what does that mean? It means that the memory of our countries is still contested, because we have people like Professor Anderson and others. When Elkins wrote the book, Anderson talked about the history of the hanged. In other words, you're not talking about the liberators, you're talking about the hanged. You're labeling, literally. These are hanged. We hang criminals, and so on. Rather than basically putting them where they belong, they kind of sponsor histories that show that we are now battling for the past. And the battle between Kenya and Britain over Kenya's past is not yet done. And a lot of our historians, including Kenyans, by the way, are on the other side, basically kind of consigning our history to kind of a history of criminals rather than a history of liberators. So we have a very kind one to President Uhuru Kenyatta, because if he did not build the museum, I don't know where King Charles would have walked into to see this, to basically utter the words he did. And the museum itself is fitting, because we're talking about 90,000 Kenyans killed within that Langata and others. 90,000 Kenyans killed there. At the same time, 160,000 detained across various settlements and so on, and over 1 million are kind of detained in their own villages. I wrote Mheshimiwa Kiraito's biography, and one of the things that really struck me is that he spent his 0 years and initial years, up to 5 years, in detention himself as a child, because the mother was detained when he was suckling him. So you can see if the relics of that kind of history, that they are still our leaders who are literally born and or brought up in detention camp just because his father had refused to come out of the forests, and therefore they decided to detain the mother. So what does this mean? The monarchy is one of the high points of the British soft power. Britain is no longer a superpower. We have China and America. Therefore, it is a declining power. That's the truth. But the other truth is that Britain is #2 soft power nation in the world after America. We are all speaking in English language. We have the British Council. We have BBC. All these are pillars of the British soft power. And we thought that it would be wise enough to come and clear the history, because the monarchy is still the most burdensome part of this soft power. And the faster they clean it, the better it is as a kind of a symbol of British, soft power. Mm-hmm. So he still has a chance to do two things. One, to apologize unequivocally because he's still within the country, and two, to show us where Dedan Kimathi's grave is in committee, so that we can do what we need to do as Kenyans. At present, the British are still detaining or jailing Kimathi. That's what it means.
Mm-hmm. So they're still detaining him.
Yes, they're still detaining him. Yes, they should set him free.
Should we say posthumously? All right.
I may weigh in there, and I like the conversation Mheshimiwa Hassan and Professor here having. Let me begin with what Mheshimiwa talked about. I appreciate that you seem to be increasingly becoming a historian, which is a good thing. But we need to note that in colonial historiography, historiography is a craft of historical scholarship. That's what we call it in technical language. The writing of colonial history, there are two broad shades of thinking. The first one is one that is fairly Eurocentric and overly revisionist. The second one is one that is Afrocentric and tends to acknowledge the African agency in the things that happened during the colonial period, and particularly in the freedom struggle. I like the list that Mheshimiwa gave. One, of course, the British Gulag, written by my contemporary Caroline Elkins when she was doing this in Harvard. I was a student in Cambridge. We were contemporaries reading at the same time in the Kenya National Archives here. I was doing the history of malaria control in Kenya. She was doing the history of Mau Mau. The other one you quoted is David Anderson, the histories of the armed. And you forgot the teacher of both, my own teacher, Professor John Lonsdale, actually, who was Anderson's supervisor at the University of Cambridge. And what this literature does, Mheshimiwa, is basically to assuage our fears and emotions particularly towards the atrocities that the British committed, not just during Mau Mau, but also in early incidences. We have talked about the Nandi, we have talked about how they treated the Griama, Makatarili Wamensa, their leader, how they treated my own people, the Busi in southwestern Kenya, by killing one of the greatest warriors that has ever been produced in that area, Otenye Nyamantari. Is to tell us bad things happened. They were done by bad people who don't seem to have kowtowed to the British civil conduct and general civilization. So don't worry, we can now move forward in a clean slate. Very interesting revisionist. I thought probably to equalize that, you could have also quoted our own scholars. Maina Wakinyati has spent his whole life writing about Mau Mau. Professor Tabitha Kanogo, Frank Furedi, and many other Africanists who have done tremendous job and recognized African agency in the whole thing. Having said that, you know, I wonder, Prof. and Shimiwa, talking about an apology. Why are we expecting to extract water out of a metal? It is not logical. It's not practical. The British are not going to apologize. Let's forget about that. They have not done it in the past, and I don't foresee them doing it in the future. I'll be very surprised. And what are the reasons? One, compared to the Germans that Prof highlighted here and the Dutch, at some point the British colonized almost 2/3 of the world. In fact, it is in this context that Winston Churchill, the one-time British Prime Minister, said that the sun never sets in the British Empire, because when it is day in one part, it is night in another. At any one given time, there was a place where it was day in the British Empire. Although his German counterpart answered him back and said, yes, the sun never sets in the British Empire because God does not trust them in darkness. You know, with such a large empire, and one characteristic of the British administration, colonial administration, is that they committed serious atrocities anywhere and wherever you find them. In India, I'm sure we remember the Janawala massacre of 1919. We remember the artificially engineered famine that killed hundreds of thousands of Indians. You know, we are talking about our own case here. Giving an equivocal apology, what that will mean is that they will accept liability. And if you ask the British declining empire, you know, to accept liability and pay reparations, they're not going to afford to do that. So they will always steer clear of you know, an apologies.
Thank you.
And indulge in what I call British speak.
Right.
I mean, if I may finish in yesterday's speech, you had it.
Well, I will. I just because my music is up. We need to take a short.